In this chapter, we'll discuss cognitive development as it occurs in the phase of development known as emerging adulthood. So, first of all, there's a few terms here I'd like for you to be aware of. There's one called the stage approach, and that just describes the shifts in the nature of thought, how thinking basically changes during this phase of development. Now, there's a term right here called psychometric approach. Okay, so psychometric, I think you mean, that refers to psychology. Metric means measurement. Okay, so measuring psychological processes. So that just basically analyzes intelligence longitudinally. Okay, so longitudinally, all that refers to is over an extended period of time. So over an extended period of time, researchers will actually analyze intelligence as it changes throughout phases of development. Okay, so the last term right here to be aware of is called the information processing approach, and that should sound really familiar. All that refers to is how the brain basically encodes, stores, and retrieves information. Just like it's usually compared to the way a computer does that. It encodes the incoming information, it stores the information, and then you're able to retrieve it, which is retrieving is actually what we just call remembering. Okay, so moving on. Another term that you should be familiar with is what's called post-formal thought, right there. And that's the fifth stage of cognitive development. And basically, it's, usually characterized by being more practical, flexible, and creative than we tend to be when we are adolescents. Okay, so that is called post-formal thought. Definitely, it's mostly characterized by the use of formal analysis. So definitely, being able to analyze formally, if we need to. And that's usually a result of brain maturation, especially in the prefrontal cortex, just for those of you who are interested in that topic. So last but not least, definitely post-formal thought also, will result in a person being a little less impulsive and reactive and a little more practical and imaginative. So let's move on here. Okay, so definitely, during this phase of development, we will start to become, individuals will become a little more aware of things like time management, using their time well. And there's then this term right here I want you to just be aware of. This is called delay discounting. So, that, is usually characterized by not putting much value on some or ignoring the consequences and rewards, of our behaviors. And where we tend to be a little more thinking about the immediate gratification of doing something. So that's called delay discounting. In this phase of development, we tend to vacillate in between these. Sometimes we will not delay discount very much. Where in other times we may do it often. But they're saying that delay discounting, it definitely occurs less and less as we age because our prefrontal cortex matures. So, we're able to plan better, and collaborate better, usually. Okay, let's move on here. Okay, so this is something that's very important, to all of us, especially when it comes to learning. And, so This is just, a very quick scenario right here. You can see right here at a college, students, they're crammed together, basically probably in a dorm room, it looks like, or just a room to study. They're all together, so students are flocking together, and they're cramming, for an exam, but, that's just, just so for those of you who, um, still kind of subscribe to this, type of strategy or something, that's kind of contrary to what scientific evidence proposes is the best way to learn. And what I mean by that is, distributed practice. That means definitely studying a little bit over a long period of time is a lot more effective. Our brains actually are able to encode the information, store the information, and retrieve the information a lot more efficiently when we study that way instead of waiting until the last minute, usually the night before an exam or the day before an exam, and then trying to study and thinking that we're just going to magically remember that, like we just put it all in there and then we're able to retrieve it temporarily, and usually that's not the case. But that might be worth discussing, in our discussion forums. uh, Tell us your experiences with that type of thinking or that type of behavior. Okay, let's switch gears here. And, so we want to talk about stereotypes. So stereotype threat, that's a possibility that one's appearance or behavior is going to be misread. And that will, that misreading, that will confirm someone else's, and others, usually oversimplified or prejudiced attitudes. So things like gender prejudice, or ethnic prejudice, that can be, stereotype threat, um, so that also refers to the fact that, mere possibility of being negatively stereotyped, that can arouse anxiety, that can disrupt cognition, distort our emotional regulation, and achievement. So definitely something that as we become older, we become a little more aware of, and we may even have experienced that, and that might be something to discuss in our forums as well. Okay, I just want to make you aware of a term, the term dialectic, or we are calling that in this chapter dialectical thought. But dialectic, all that refers to is the concept that every idea or truth that also bears within itself the opposite idea or truth. So basically, we've heard phrases like there's two sides to every coin, or, no matter how thin you slice it, it still has two sides to it. Well, that refers to the concept of dialectic or dialectical thought. Okay. Now I just put in here, reminded, those of you who are interested in this, that was actually developed by the philosopher Hegel. Okay. But you definitely don't have to memorize that. Okay, so definitely, in dialectical type thinking, so that is usually, occurs as a result of post-formal thought. It's a form of post-formal thought, and that's considered the most advanced cognitive process. So I listed a few here. Involves the ability to consider a thesis and its antithesis and arrive at a synthesis. So being able to weigh both sides of the story and then come up, synthesize those in order to come up with an answer. Whereas, like say when we were, teenagers or younger, we may not have been able to do that as well. Okay, this is just a reminder here of summary. Let's just say a summary of what dialectical thought consists of. Okay, and then there's two terms on this slide that I would like for you to be aware of. One is called subjective thought, and that means thinking that's based on one's personal qualities. Things like, personal experiences, one's culture, one's goals. That is called subjective thought. But objective thought, on the other hand, is thinking that is not based on the thinker's personal qualities, but instead is based on facts and numbers. So definitely things, like mathematical type thought, or pure facts, you know, so definitely that is become aware of the difference between those types of thinking or thought, and definitely not only become aware, but definitely seek true understanding of the difference between those two types of thought, and you'll do well in further studies. So also the term cognitive flexibility. So definitely remember I mentioned in an earlier slide that during this phase of development, that cognitive flexibility is a an important factor during this phase. So here are just some examples of what it helps with and what it involves. So feel free to definitely pause the video and become a little more familiar with those. Okay, and just here's an example, of dialectical thought and how it occurs and how it's affected by culture. And this is just one example. Okay, so this is just something just to be roughly familiar with. But definitely, research has shown, that, Asians, they tend to think, a little more holistically and seek synthesis. And, and colleagues, they tend to, because, they tend to be, remember, they come from what's known as a collectivistic culture, or, so, as kind of the opposite of, in Western culture, we are known as more individualists. Okay, so just, it doesn't mean one is necessarily better than the other. It's just something to be aware of, okay? Okay, so let's switch gears here and let's just talk about, how we advance morally in, developing, adulthood. And, so definitely, this refers to a test, and you don't have to memorize this, but defining issues test, that's called the DIT. And, certain types of psychologists, or counselors or, whatever will use this, but, it's a way to measure moral thinking by having the test taker rank possible solutions to moral dilemmas. And so, it's usually, a pretty good, indicator of moral growth, and especially when it's, measured over a long period of time in individuals and see how they change, throughout growth. Okay. All right. So briefly, we'll talk about gender differences in faith and practice. So generally speaking, women tend to, attend religious services more often than do men. So do you think that's true? Have you experienced that, or do you see that with your family or friends, Just something to think about. Okay. And, why do you think that might be the case, So definitely, they mention, well, a couple of reasons might be things, like social and gender conditioning. Other, causes or factors that might be involved in that occurring are things like education, certain dilemmas, culture, as I mentioned earlier. All those can maybe affect, gender differences in, things like faith, and attending church service, things like that. Okay, so we're going to carry on just a little further this conversation here. So morality of care, that's the tendency of females to be reluctant to judge right and wrong in absolute terms due to socialization. So that is termed by psychologists as morality of care. That is just the tendency of females to be reluctant to judge right or wrong in absolute terms. So one may notice, these are broad generalizations again, but one may notice that, females, they, may be a little more hesitant to say, oh, that's just wrong, or no, that's the way it should be. Whereas, males might be quicker to judge, in that way. But that refers to morality of care. And same thing, morality of justice, right or wrong, same things apply as the others. Okay, now this researcher right here named Haidt, you don't have to memorize this, but that's, I wanted you to make you aware that this researcher's theory of moral development, it suggests more distinct clusters of moral development that occurs in cultures, in a lot of cultures. And so all that refers to is, moral development might occur in clusters, like all types of moral development might occur simultaneously. Things like caring for others, harm no one, but be fair, seek purity, respect authority, all those might occur in a cluster instead of just, one thing at a time. And so this researcher right here proposed that. Okay, now very quickly here, just in regard to higher education, the current reality in higher education, shows that over the first 2 years of college, roughly half of college students, they have been shown to make no cognitive advances. So remember, these are broad generalizations again. This is not judgment on any in a hard and fast way here. No judgment here. But so what do you think about that? Do you think that that is true? Do you think there's a reason for that? They've mentioned a couple things, like, well, college has changed. It even might be a little less rigorous than it was, say, 50 years ago or something like that, or 40 years ago, something like that. Because also because of things, like college has tended to, adopt more of a corporate model, which views students as customers. So in your experience as students, do you feel that that is true? That might be worth discussing also in our discussion posts. Continuing on, so on the other hand, also it's been determined though that there is actually better instruction now in higher education. And learners are more engaged. There's more use of technology. Obviously online offerings. Okay, well, that's pretty obvious during these times, with the COVID thing going on. So let's move on here. Also, in regard to college, there's the term called massification. Massification, that just refers to college is now for the masses, not just for the elite. So, do you feel that that is true? Do you feel in your experience, have you seen any changes or experienced anything at all in that regard? Okay. So there's, also that college is, tending to become more diverse, so, um, please pause the video if you are interested in gaining a little more insight into this. This is something that we at colleges, we definitely feel strongly about, having a very diverse, uh, you know, um, types of students here, and everything. So, okay, so definitely, we don't have to read through these together, but feel free to pause the video and look at it to gain further insight. And same goes with this right here. There are definitely more community colleges and more career type training available these days. There's definitely more part-time students, definitely female students, minority hires, things like that, so, just, these are just broad generalizations, some broad statistics, and so definitely, think about these and see if you have anything to contribute in the discussion forums. And so that concludes our discussion, in regard to this chapter. Please get out your study guides, answer the questions, refer to your textbooks, in this chapter for further insight, into the study guide questions. And we'll see you in the next video.